there is no competition. It's like one is like, several times cheaper than the other one. Tesla is 7 times more capital efficient than competitors. They are already in a position to actually undercut market prices. So I think it's very challenging to compete meaningfully against Tesla in the next few years in that initial ramp.
All right, so I have the legendary Pierre from New Street Research. Pierre has studied Tesla very closely. He even has one of the best replies from Elon Musk of all time that he's going to show us, right behind them, right there in that little.
I'm going to show
Can we
you.
see it? What does that say? Let's see.
This is a tweet that made me famous. Can you see it? Fine. Here it is.
Look at that. Wonderful. Ferragu is remarkably insightful. Amazing. And this is from May 18th, 2021, 9:07 p.m. local time.
Excellent.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
This is not a fake.
It is not a fake. We can verify. We'll go right in the internet and verify, bring up some fact checking for Pierre. But no, seriously, but Pierre has been an excellent, amazing analyst studying Tesla super closely. He has really studied not just the growth in auto, but just all the different sectors that Tesla has been playing in. And he's been one of the go-to guys, not just for Wall Street, but retail investors and a lot of people that are trying to understand what Elon is working on with Tesla. And he and the team just released a study on the Robotaxi market, specifically around Tesla's Robotaxi Cybercab solutions as compared to Waymo and Uber and other competitors as well. And a lot of the insights that are there for people to really get to understand are pretty remarkable and very insightful. And so maybe, Pierre, for those that might not be familiar with who you are and sort of what you guys do, maybe a quick intro, and then we'll get right into the meat and the bones of the research.
Yeah. Thanks, legendary Farland, for having me. I think you're way more of a legend than I am.
I don't know about that.
And I'm really glad to do that once in a while, to share our research with the Tesla community and retail investors at large. So it's always a pleasure. So in terms of background, as you might hear, I grew up in France. I started my career at the Boston Consulting Group as a strategy consultant in technology. Then I got fed up with advising management teams, and I went into the business of advising investors. Instead, I became like an equity, analyst, research analyst at Bernstein. And at Bernstein, I covered technology, mostly like telecom equipment and smartphones. And at some point, I saw the electric revolution coming through. I saw the AI revolution coming through. It was in 2016, so very, very early. I really thought, well, electricity is going to change everything, and AI is going to change everything, in particular the silicon supply chain. And I started writing research on that at Bernstein, and people thought I was crazy. People were very upset because I was writing research about companies I was not covering and things like that. And I thought, well, maybe I should do that on my own. And in 2018, I started my own research company, New Street Research, with this very broad mandate, which is to cover really technology disruption and new trends and things like that. And one of the first pieces of research we wrote in 2018, the title was, "If you are short Tesla, you better read this." And yes, that's and then we wrote some good stuff about the ramp of the Model 3, about the return on invested capital of Tesla factories and things like that. And so Tesla has been a very important part of what we've done, but we're also very active in AI infrastructure. We can't wait to initiate covering names in space technology soon. And yes, so our job is really to try to figure out stuff, to really spend a lot of resources and efforts on problems that are difficult, that people don't research. And we do that mostly for institutional investors. They are our clients. And as I said, we like to share our work with retail investors once in a while, just for the pleasure.
It's awesome. Yeah. And the retail community definitely greatly benefits from that. I think the most interesting thing about this new piece of research that you guys have come out with is that it's really talking about the disruptive force around self-driving vehicles and Tesla's very unique positioning in relation to everybody else, not just from a cost structure, but from a scale structure and the strategies behind how Tesla is likely to execute against this, and sort of the fundamental advantages they have from owning their fleet and also the entire ecosystem, which then allows customers to potentially be part of it. I mean, it's a very fascinating thesis. So maybe we can start at the top of the thesis. So what is the grand thesis that you guys have come out with here as it relates to Tesla?
Well, why don't I take you through our thinking process on this one?
Yeah.
Back in June last year, I came back from San Francisco, having spent like 3-4 days traveling around in Waymo cars. And I asked Ben and my team, well, like Robotaxi is it works. But why is Waymo stuck at 15% market share in San Francisco? It doesn't make sense, because we've always said that Robotaxi will crush ride sharing, would like be far more efficient. And so what's happening there? We see Waymo barely, like as I said, between 15 and 20% market share in San Francisco, and instead of keeping growing share in San Francisco to reap, the benefits of local scale, they're actually starting operations in Los Angeles, in Austin, and in other places without aiming for more market share. So we really wanted to understand that, and we went into looking at the operating model of Waymo, their economic model, and we came to the striking conclusion that Waymo today, on a cost basis, is actually not very competitive against Uber. It's actually the cost per mile of an Uber car, of a Waymo car, is slightly in excess of an Uber car. If you want to show the slides.
Yeah, slide 7, right? I think.
You can show slide 5.
5?
So you have like the cost per mile of Waymo today is actually 30% more expensive. That's actually, so for you it would be slide 6. It's the one with number 5 on it. Yeah, exactly. That's it. No. What's happening? Do we have not? Yeah. That's the one. That's the one you call 7? Okay.
Yeah, that's the one I call 7. It's the one y'all email it to me. I don't know.
Okay, that's because I am on the wrong document. Sorry, apologies for that.
It's all
okay. So yes, so it's actually, even if you don't have a driver, the car is so expensive. You have the cost of supervising the car, which is a reality, and you have like a few other things like that in your cost structure. But you can see here that the depreciation of a Waymo car is 90 cents per mile, and the cost of an Uber driver is $1.40 per mile. So you can say that you're saving 60 cents on a net basis here with a Waymo driver, which is not a lot, and so that's not enough to make the Waymo cost competitive. So what does that mean? That means if Waymo wants to grow market share, they have to become very price competitive against Uber, which is not the case today. Today, like various studies and measurements suggest Waymo is actually more expensive than Uber on an average per mile cost, and so you can't hope to gain market share without slashing prices, of course. And Waymo cannot afford that, because if they do that, they actually move from probably being, we estimate, break-even today on their operation in a mature place like San Francisco, to losing significant money. So that's problem number one, is that the promise of Robotaxi works if you can do it with an inexpensive car. If you do it with $100,000 car, it actually doesn't work.
And so that is a fascinating, if you don't mind, I just want to dig into that a little bit, because one of the most fascinating things about this Waymo dynamic, so there was a study that came out from San Francisco that was showing how Waymo was, in relation to Lyft and Uber, was eating up market share, right? I think it was like 20-25% of all rides in the geofence that they were able to service, but they were doing it and they were taking that market share at a cost premium. So they were actually charging 20 to 30% more than your average Uber and Lyft, which on one side speaks to just how good the product is, that, you know, people and the services that people are still willing to pay a premium to go in a self-driving car. But in my head, this whole time, I'm like, well, you know, even though it might cost a lot to do a Waymo, that cost premium is just supply and demand dynamics, because people are willing to pay more for a better product because there's nobody in the car and you get it all to yourself. And, you know, you can bring your child. You don't have to worry about safety, right? And it's comfortable. You get a very consistent experience. But the assertion here is that might be true, but in reality, if they charged any less, like from a business fundamentals perspective, they would not be able to operate in the long term, because they would actually lose money if they charge any less than what they charge today. Is that a fair representation?
Yes, exactly. If you flip to the next page, we run an estimate and we're like, okay, if Waymo were operating at a 30% discount on Uber, they would lose in San Francisco $500 million a year. So that would cost them a lot of money. And this is the kind of money Uber lost easily, maybe not on the scale of San Francisco, but they lost like billions of dollars, if not tens of billions of dollars, to establish their footprint and their scale. So, you know, when you ramp a business like that, it can become very, very cash consuming. But for Uber, it was, I'm going to lose money initially to hire a lot of drivers, hire a lot of new users. And then once I have enough drivers and riders, I can run this beautiful operation that is very profitable. Here for Waymo, it's like, if I grow my business today, the only way I become profitable is by lowering the costs of my car. And that's going to take me a very long time, because I don't manufacture the car myself, because I am stuck with like a technology stack that is extremely expensive with LiDARs and radars. And so we dug into how much Waymo could reduce their cost and what their plans were. And we think they understand the issue and they're working on it. But when you buy a car from a third-party OEM, when you have to add a very expensive suite, the reality is that you can't aim for more than, you know, reducing the cost of the car to maybe $70,000 in the long run, which would put them in a position to be competitive against Uber, but we'll discuss it later. Not against Tesla, obviously.
Yeah.
Thank you to the sponsor of this podcast, Rebellionaire. Rebellionaire partners with Tesla investors who have at least $2 million in Tesla stock to reach their financial goals. Other investment firms might look at your Tesla position and think, wow, you have way too much. This is way too risky. But Rebellionaire actually embraces the long-term potential of a company like Tesla. They'll also look to maximize your profits by employing different tactics like selling covered calls, adding or trimming, etc. And the Rebellionaire team, which includes Bradford Ferguson and Matt Smith, they do this by spending a lot of time analyzing Tesla, the company, in very novel and unique ways. They've done things like cross-country FSD trips, the self-driving suite that Tesla has. They've done a lot of novel research around the energy sector and the humanoid robot and AI sector as well. Make sure to go to rebellionaire.com/Farzad, rebellionaire.com/Farzad, and that's how they'll know that I sent you. Thank you very much.
Now, there is another aspect that we discovered as we worked on Waymo, which is that, as you said, that these guys have been able to price in line with Uber, or probably even at a premium, and gain share, because people love the very nice Jaguar, not having anyone, and just like the novelty of the service. And so why did they not exceed 20% market share? And by the way, you mentioned, you know, like a 25% market share, which was, I think, something largely overestimated there. Like we crunched a lot of numbers, and we think their market share is closer to 15 than 25%.
Okay.
And so there is another reason. And to understand that reason, maybe let's go to slide. Let's go to slide. To slide, so it should be slide 5 for you.
This guy?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So there is a big difference between running like a marketplace like Uber and running a robotaxi fleet like Waymo. And the difference is that Uber is really adjusting capacity to demand in real time. When there are too many drivers on the road, they lower prices, and that kills the drivers who are the most, revenue sensitive. And when they need more drivers on the road, they increase prices to kill the demand of riders who are price sensitive. So you always have the number of cars you need. When you run a robotaxi fleet, you need your fleet to be able to manage the peak hour. And at the trough hour, 80% of your fleet is going to be idle. And that's capital that is locked, that is idle, not making money. And so if you have 15% market share, you can keep your cars busy all day long. But if you want to increase your market share, you start having a fleet that becomes idle at the trough hour. So the marginal cost of capital is increasing for a robotaxi fleet, which means that there is a disincentive to grow your market share. Once you are at 15%, you know that your next car on the road is going to be significantly less utilized than the ones you have already. And you don't have that many cars because you have them manufactured by Jaguar. And so what you do, instead of growing your market share in San Francisco, you start a new operation in Los Angeles and then in Austin, et cetera, et cetera. So there is this element that the robotaxi fleet has actually a capital disadvantage. They need a lot of capital to serve a market. And that's something that makes us relatively bullish about Uber. We think that Uber actually has a very strong competitive advantage, which is that, okay, maybe they have to pay for drivers, but they can adjust the capacity, the number of cars they have on the road in real time. It's a massive advantage. And of course, there is something very interesting here for Tesla, which is that Tesla can play a hybrid game where they have a base-owned fleet that can cover the trough hour, that can be very highly utilized. And for peak hours, they can actually leverage Tesla owners in the area who can contribute to the network with their personal cars. And that is an advantage in terms of capital intensity that is extremely, extremely fundamental. And so if we look at slide number 15, you'll see something fairly interesting from the perspective of Tesla. So from the perspective of Waymo, what we say is, once I have 15 or 20% market share in San Francisco, my next car is going to be better utilized in a new market. So I am opening new markets instead of growing my market share. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, for Tesla, what you see here is that if Tesla has a fleet that basically meets about half the demand, the fleet is going to be utilized 80% of the time. That's the red part of the curve. You see, you have like this Tesla's owned cars that cover about half the demand. And then for the peak hours in green, you have cars coming from users around you. And here, I'd like to highlight two things. The first one is that in a place like San Francisco, you need a very, very small percentage of your car owners to contribute. We are talking like low single digit, like 1 or 2% of car owners contributing to your network is enough. Because you don't need that many cars to run a robotaxi operation in San Francisco. And then the second thing is that if you compare the capital intensity of Waymo versus Tesla to deploy a fleet that can cover the San Francisco market, like the ride that Uber and Lyft are delivering in San Francisco today, you need 10,000 cars. So for Waymo, even if you are like at, aggressively looking at in the long run when they can get cars for $70,000, it's going to cost them 700 millions. And Tesla, they need only 5,000 cars that are going to be much better utilized. And the other 5,000 cars that they need only for peak hours are going to get them for Tesla owners. So they need to spend only $100 million. So Waymo is 7 times more capital intensive than Tesla at that game. And that doesn't make me super optimistic about Waymo.
Yeah.
Because I am talking about the $70,000 cars, which is like their medium-term objective. I'm not talking like the $200,000 cars they have today or the $150,000 cars they have today.
Yeah.
And so now it's going to be like a very, very significant competitive advantage for Tesla when you get into growth mode, when we are going to see like robotaxi fleet deploy very rapidly. There is one player that is going to require 7 times less capital than others in order to do that. And how sustainable is that advantage? Well, Tesla, only Chinese manufacturers know how to manufacture a car as cost efficiently as Tesla. Like in the Western world, nobody comes close. Tesla is fully integrated, so you don't have to pay gross margin to a car manufacturer or anything like that. And then today, if you assume that Tesla sticks to the vision-only stack and Waymo sticks to the LiDAR-only stack, you have like a 3, 4, 5x like incompressible cost difference between the two. So the cost competitive advantage of Tesla is sustainable probably in the very, very long term. It's very structural. And then the fact that you can use the cars of your clients, of your car owners, is something that probably Waymo is never going to be able to replicate. Where would they start? Who would buy a car with a Waymo driver or anything like that? It's never going to happen. So I think it's like an extremely defensible competitive advantage.
Yeah, then that's a fascinating piece of the puzzle. I think a lot of people oftentimes forget. And this is, if you go back and read Tesla's Master Plan Part 2, there's a section right in there that talks about sharing. And that sharing piece describes exactly the dynamic you're talking through, which is Tesla's, their goal would have been to, exactly like the way you've so eloquently sort of laid it out for us. It's Tesla's going to essentially ensure that about 80% of rides, let's say combined between off-peak and peak hours, are taken care of. And anytime we have a demand peak, so when people have to go to work, people come back from work, people want to go out to the bars, people want to go to an event, whatever the thing that causes this green spike, then Tesla has the ability to essentially, literally, for every Tesla owner that has the Tesla app, which is probably going to be close to 100% of them, for those that have the hardware capable for Robotaxi, they'll get a signal that says, hey, guess what? We have peak hour demand here. We need more cars in the fleet. Would you like to add yours to the fleet? We estimate you'll make, $100 today. Press yes. And then the car will just, and then I'm sure they'll have to do some checks for like cleanliness and stuff. And those are logistics that they'll have to figure out. But that is a unique advantage to the company, because for the last how many years, they've built up the production capacity to preload these robotaxis into every area where customers have bought it. And then, like you said, about 1 to 2% of it has to be activated for that peak demand to be taken care of. And it sounds crazy because there's something like this. I mean, Uber exists, but Uber doesn't make their own cars. They don't provide their own fleet. They are fully dependent, like you said, on that off-peak, peak sort of thing, and they incentivize the people to come on the network through pricing. When actually I have a question about that at a later point that I want to ask you, but it's just fascinating. They're just preloaded robotaxis to take care of peak hour demand, and that's going to be their competitive advantage.
And very clearly, there is nobody on the horizon capable of doing that. Nobody has a car that is selling by millions every year as passenger cars to consumers who get into the market and are robotaxi ready, like any Tesla sold today. So that part of the vision is absolutely fascinating. And I think we felt with this work, we had quantified something very important, which is like you're 7 times more capital efficient thanks to that. And it's like nobody can compete against you, basically.
Yeah.
Now, when we got there, we had a moment. We paused and we were like, wait. So you expect Tesla owners to bring their car to the Robotaxi network during peak hours, but during peak hours is when they're going to want to use their own cars, right? So we thought at some point, well, the model actually works on a spreadsheet, but it's not going to work in the real world. So what we did is that we did some research and we asked actually Tesla owners, how do you feel about bringing your car to the Tesla network if it pays you half the lease or something like that? And the response is actually fairly consistent. You have a significant portion of the population, I wouldn't say the majority, but like a significant minority of people who are like, oh, if I can do that, I'll probably have a second Tesla and I'll have it financed by the Robotaxi. And that's a Tesla I'll have, for my wife on weekends or to do this and that. And so it's not actually overlapping with the peak hour. So what I would expect is that once Tesla rolls out Robotaxi fleets, you'll have actually a visible surge in demand for Tesla because a lot of people are going to buy a Tesla thinking, oh, I'm going to buy a Tesla and bring it to the Robotaxi network and have it half paid. And that's going to be my second Tesla. So I think it's fascinating. It's going to call in fresh capital in a very natural way. That's fascinating.
Super fascinating to think through, huh? Wow. One of the things I wanted to ask you about on that sort of like the off-peak, peak dynamic in relation to Uber. So one of the comments you made was that this actually says that Uber will actually be in a good position because they are the ones that are very capable of adjusting to peak and off-peak demand by just lowering and increasing prices for the drivers, and that's what calls more cars to the network, right? If a drive, so for those that might not be familiar with that dynamic is, in a, like, let's say, I don't know, 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. when there will not be that much demand for an Uber at on a Tuesday, Uber is going to on purpose bring down the price of how much you're going to pay a driver, and then so that's going to limit the number of people that go out. Whereas, let's say New Year's Eve, there's going to be a lot of people trying to go to the bars. They're going to pay drivers $100 a ride, whatever the number might be. And of course, people are going to be like, well, of course, I want to make $100. Why not? I'm going to go. But in that dynamic itself, though, doesn't that... So because Uber has to pay drivers, isn't Tesla uniquely positioned to be much more competitive in that dynamic because in those off-peak hours, Uber has to lower the price to get the fleet right-sized, so they're not losing money. But by default, isn't that going to attract a lower quality driver, a lower quality car, and then you're going to have a giant gap between what Tesla can offer from a Cybercab, Robotaxi, Model Y perspective, with the same pricing as that lower quality car, lower quality driver. And in addition to that, Tesla's advantage is going to be the privacy, the safety, the comfort, the consistency, and at a significant profit compared to Uber. So doesn't that make Uber even less competitive? Because in that dynamic, Robotaxi is far, far better from a value proposition. Did I articulate that properly?
Yeah, I think you did. And if you compare a Robotaxi, I would say the Tesla way, with like a very inexpensive car, a very inexpensive technology stack, to like an Uber driver with their own car, there is no competition. It's like one is several times cheaper than the other one, and yes, you should expect the Tesla value proposition to win without any problem. Now, if you inject that into the real world, what you're going to see is two things. The first one is what we like to call the natural duopoly mechanism, which is your Tesla, you have a great opportunity to take market share from Uber because you have a very significant cost advantage, and you can go pedal to metal on pricing and take 95% market share, or you can actually earn a very healthy profit and take only 70% market share. And you will see that in most cases, it's a relatively flat curve. That's where the 80-20 rule comes from, and you'll see very rapidly that, and by the way, that was a call we made on the ride-sharing market very early on in 2019. We said it's going to become a duopoly everywhere in the world. So any with like a leading player that is going to have very, very high quality economics like Uber, and the number two player will have rather thin economics like Lyft. And so that played out exactly right. So when you see Tesla growing their business against Uber, expect them to be very aggressive on pricing, to take a lot of market share, and Uber's share will shrink to people who like to have an Uber driver who are not comfortable with an autonomous car. And you will always have use cases, like an older person, someone who needs to get the door open, or someone who is not comfortable with the technology, etc., etc. They will also get the market for rides that are challenging for a robotaxi, and that we'll have to see. If you ask Elon, he's like, no, the robotaxi is going to drive even better than an Uber driver. My view is that you will always have, for a very long time, a very large chunk of the market that is going to be challenging for robotaxis and good for human drivers. And so if the market grows 4x in volumes because robotaxi are driving average unit prices down significantly, it's a very elastic market. If Tesla takes like 3/4 of the opportunity and Uber maintains, like a 25% market share, which sounds like the crazy, horrible case for Uber, the reality is that Uber is still like a very defensible business. And that's a baseline. And so, of course, like that means probably in value, the business shrinks, and maybe they maintain 25% market share in a market that has grown 4x, but maybe that's in volumes, and the revenue per mile has come down like by 30% or something like that. So it's not great for them. Now you have to inject into that feature all the other robotaxi players who don't have the benefit of being the lower cost car, and who don't have the benefit of being able to mobilize on demand an extension of their fleet. What are these players going to do? They're going to knock at the door of Uber and tell Uber, well, we can serve you with our fleet, let's say 30% of your demand, and then you continue to serve the peak hours with human drivers. And for us, providers of the robotaxi technology, that's the only way we can compete against Tesla. And guess what? For you, Uber, that's the best way for you to compete against Tesla. So the kind of call we're making is that it's still difficult to know, but we kind of like a potential landing point for that market is that Tesla becomes a market leader, and then the challenger becomes Uber integrated with the second best robotaxi player.
Interesting. And so do you see those, from that dynamic, so Tesla's going to have the lowest cost per mile advantage by far because of their scale, their technology, their stack, their ability to just call a fleet of drivers to show up. So it's going to be extremely difficult to compete with them I want to go from point A to point B in a nice car, in a nice, safe car. And so do you see that the Uber market share, let's call it, starting to become very specialized around solutions that Tesla either doesn't want to provide or wouldn't or can't provide? So I'm thinking like, do we start getting autonomous party buses? Do we start getting autonomous, worker vans and sleeper cabs? And those become specialized solutions that then Uber starts to offer, as long as Tesla doesn't want to do that, right? So because if I'm thinking about it just from point A to point B, with enough time, why would anybody use Uber? Like, even if we're talking about like people that are scared of the technology, you would think that over time, people are going to be like, okay, do I want to pay a premium for Uber, or do I just want to go to the airport for $5? Like, why? What am I so afraid of? These things have been on the road for 5-10 years. Like, what am I afraid of? So eventually, I'm thinking it might just get specialized, right? How do you view that?
So it becomes like a very difficult dynamic system to model. So first of all, as you said, it plays out on a very long period of time. But let's say in 15 years from now, Tesla robotaxis have completely nailed it. They are like virtually sentient, and then they can do any job. And you have like the nice cyber cabs flying around, and Tesla is probably the scale leader in the robotaxi business. Always remember that by the time we get there, this technology would have matured. What is the technology of Tesla? It's 8 high-definition camera, a very efficient piece of silicon, machine learning, and the data, a machine learning architecture, and the data that you've needed over the years to make the machine learning very efficient. It is actually a business that makes room for followers. So you will have the second best robotaxi player. So I'm going to make up a scenario just out of thin air to make it very tangible. Mobileye today has developed a very advanced vision-only solution, supervision. They also have like a deeper stack for robotaxis with LiDARs and radars. And they have like a fairly advanced AI approach to what they do. And today, in terms of volumes and things like that, they're kind of like, they're not in a good place compared to Tesla. But in 15 years from now, they will probably have something that can compete against Tesla with a car that costs maybe $30,000 instead of $20,000. And they will be partnering with Uber. And Tesla will be in this position, like the natural duopoly situation I described to you a few minutes ago, which is Tesla going to want to be at 20% margins to kill the alternative powered by Uber and Mobileye? Or are they going to want to have a 50% gross margin and leave these guys 30% market share?
Got it. So, and sort of speaks to the fact that the market is going to be so damn big.
And the market,
the
market is like the full, the potential of the robotaxi opportunity is like, we could have 20 times more miles driven than today once we have like very efficient, very cost-efficient robotaxis. Because we know from the history of Uber, of how Uber displays taxis, that this is one of the most elastic markets in the world. And when you see that, the kind of asymptote of elasticity are like the cost of a bus ride and the cost of a subway ride or a train ride are in the tens of cents per mile. Once robotaxis are getting close to these prices, you could imagine that you start seeing significantly less traffic on trains and subways and buses because people take robotaxis instead. It's barely more expensive. And that has not even started. Like, only very affluent people, stopped using the subway and use Uber instead because it's still easily 10 times more expensive. But the day it's twice more expensive, that becomes very, 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 very appealing. So, and the number of miles of public transportation is like, I can't remember, but it's maybe 50 times more or 100 times more than the miles driven in ride sharing and personal transportation.
Yeah, got it. So then how are you thinking, and I know you have a few slides on this. Actually, before I do that, ask the question, did you want to hit another slide before I ask my question?
No, please go ahead.
The scale, so the rollout, the speed of the rollout, so how like the cadence of how this is going to happen. So one of the things you mentioned was Waymo has to search for new markets right as they hit 20%, or well before that. They have to get prepped to go live because they do not have the cost of capital is way too much when you are thinking about getting from 20% to 50% because you're going to have a lot more idle time, and so you're not going to be able to generate money on that extra capacity that you've built in that area because the Waymos are just going to be sitting around doing nothing for most of the time until peak hours come, but peak hours are a small percentage of the day. So by default, they have to go to many geographies and then reach that 15-20% threshold, and that's how they make money on their business. Whereas Tesla is uniquely positioned to go into an area and in theory grow well past that 20% threshold. And so in theory, we could see a dynamic where, in, let's say in Austin, Tesla could just, they could go to different markets, but they can also just take over Austin. They're going to just be like, screw it, we're just going to take over Austin, right? So how are you viewing that dynamic in the next few months to years to maybe the rest of the decade? And so how do you see this actually shaking out from a unit perspective in the coming years?
Well, I was hanging out with Elon last night, and he told me that tomorrow the world would be covered with cybercars.
Yes. I knew it. That post meant something. That reply there meant something.
Exactly. No, so like the question on timing, of course, I don't have an answer, but I have a good framework to think about it. So I would say the first element of my framework is the one you summarized very well, which is once Tesla is up and running in a market, they can go way, way faster than Waymo. And so you should expect them to be able actually to go from 30 to 300 to 3,000 cars in Austin very, very fast because they have no limitation in their economic model. The second aspect of the framework you have to keep in mind is there is like an asymptotic point in time in 15 years from now where a robotaxi is near sentient and can do anything. But we don't know if we're going to be at 50% of that or 90% of that in a year or 2 years or 3 years from now. And we don't even know how to measure that. So it's very, very uncertain. And so the question is, what is the addressable market of the robotaxi? And that question is in terms of geography, locality, and also in terms of type of rides, depending on the time of the day, the starting point, the arrival point, etc. It's actually a very complex problem that we can't really model because it's very, very dynamic, of course. So we don't know how fast. We know that economically Tesla can go actually almost overnight. Imagine if they have like a production line producing 5,000 robotaxis a week, like they can ramp. Economically, it's not very complicated to build 5,000 cars, pay for them, and run them in Austin. Actually, if you look at the free cash flow of the model, by the time you have to pay your suppliers, you probably have made enough money to pay for the car. No, maybe not that well, but it's probably like it's 7 times less capital intensive than the other models. So it's going to be very. We don't know how easy it's going to be for Tesla, but we know it's going to be 7 times easier than it is for Waymo. But what we don't know is when are you going to hit a ceiling in terms of people who are not ready yet to take a Tesla because, I don't know, they don't like Elon, or they don't trust the technology, or they prefer to have a human driver, they don't know it exists, etc., etc., etc. So these are going to be the limiting factors. So on a relative basis, the one thing is that it costs Tesla 7 times less to grow. That Tesla can grow almost limitless in a given market economically, whereas Waymo is stuck at 15-20% market share. So that's like really more like the economic model. Then on the technology front, there is something that is very interesting, but that we can't really measure yet, which is that the FSD technology is actually developed, trained, tested nationwide, whereas the Waymo technology is actually developed,
Yeah.
tested, operated market by market. And it's difficult to know how much of an advantage it could become for Tesla, but it might be a very, very significant advantage, of course. And like I live like in a small village in Connecticut, and my FSD 14, I don't remember the last time I drove my car. It's like I never drive, absolutely never drive. And I know there is still a gap between that and a Robotaxi capable car. But I know that nobody else than Tesla has that capability of saying, well, anywhere in the country, my car can drive fine, maybe 98 or 99% of the time. And that's already a reality.
Yeah. It is so fascinating sort of having watched the progress of the technology going from V11 was the last version that Tesla had that wasn't neural net based, like end to end. And I know 12 still was not fully end to end, but it was mostly end to end. And then the relative jump that we got from 9 to 10 to 11 was more like step changes. But then from 12 onwards, it's felt exponential, where 12 was dramatically better than 11, 13 was dramatically better than 12, and then 14 was dramatically better than 13. It keeps like closing, at least from my use case, it keeps closing hundreds and thousands of corner cases of like, I don't like the way. Yeah, it's none of it is like unsafe, almost always before 14, but it was kind of like, oh, this little thing it did here, that was weird. And I would have stopped here differently. I would have slowed down here differently. And now 14's like just, they say, Jesus, take the wheel. FSD, take the wheel. Just go, right? I don't care. Like, you're driving good enough. And then if it's somebody that's like behind, and once this, they actually get a safety level that's good enough, the person that's going to be riding in this as a Robotaxi, the chance that they're actually going to be actively paying attention to how the car performs after the novelty wears off, which is maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, they're just going to be like this the whole time, right? Just on their phone. And so from a performance perspective, what's fascinating from me watching the technology grow is that I would have thought that the comfort side would lag the safety side. But what the neural networks have done is that the comfort side came first, where it feels so good, but Tesla obviously doesn't have the data yet to say you don't have to pay attention anymore. But once that comes, the performance of the vehicle is going to be so unbelievably good from a comfort perspective that the stickiness of that technology is going to be an absolute no-brainer. Whereas in like the Waymo example that I like to sort of sometimes think through is, Waymo's technology is absolutely amazing, and I prefer a Waymo over an Uber 100% of the time. But it is a little jerky in places. There are specific spots where it's like, it didn't do as good as FSD. And I think for the person that is hesitant of the technology, I don't know if Waymo probably captures a huge portion of tech forward people, but can it capture the tech hesitant person as well as Tesla could because of that comfort gap, right? So, and I'm wondering how much that's going to play into this sort of Robotaxi dynamic, because it's obvious that the best, most comfortable performance for a Robotaxi has to be rooted in neural nets, because neural nets are the things that actually account for human behavior, not the multi-sensor, heuristic-driven sort of like, and I guess you could use neural nets for that too, but it just seems the simpler sensor suite makes it a lot easier for Tesla to achieve the comfort that they need. So that's just a fascinating thing that I've been thinking through, is like the comfort of the system is also something that people don't really talk about, but it's so important in creating that defensible strategy when it comes to Robotaxi, because it will actually make people feel comfortable riding in that vehicle, Yeah,
it's very difficult to make a call on that front. On one hand, I think your argument has weight. On the other hand, you will probably have people who will see it like the exact opposite way, which is that they are not going to trust the AI-heavy technology and trust more like the sensing heavier technology, because they trust more the sensors than the neural nets. The team that has a very interesting perspective on that matter in the industry is actually Mobileye, and because what Mobileye is doing is, we are very confident we can get to a certain level of reliability with vision only that would get us to ease off. But for a robotaxi, which is like nobody on the seat, instead of pushing AI to get the next 4 nines, we're going to add one suite of sensors, and we get like a dual AI that combined delivers the additional 4 nines. And so you see that mathematically the two approaches are very, very legit. And some people prefer the dual system, redundancy, the source of perceived reliability, and other people, I guess, like you, are like completely religious and think AI is the best.
I want to know that part.
But we don't know. What we know is that like Tesla proved, especially I agree with you, between 12, 13, and 14, these two hopes that the progress you get to with AI, with an AI-heavy approach, are very, very impressive. I think you are very lucky to not drive your car every day and to be like an advanced FSD user. But you live on another planet. Like most people don't have any sense of how good the technology is, how well the car drives. And like, I always like to tell this anecdote. A couple of years ago, when I was using FSD, my wife was like, "Hey, honey, please take back the wheel. I'm afraid. I'm scared."
Yours and mine.
And today, when I'm driving myself, my wife tells me, "Honey, do you mind like clicking on FSD because I'm afraid?" And so that tells you like the flip in perception is absolutely fascinating. Now, I would caution you against opposing that too much between Waymo and Tesla or anyone else. Waymo, as a matter of fact, is using a lot of AI as well. Is using generative AI. I think it's just a matter of how much they use. And you started a very long time ago before generative AI, without like the vision only hardware principle, and so you ended up relying a lot of heavy sensing, and so that probably limited your progress on the AI front. And then Tesla went like balls on the wall on vision only, etc., and probably made progress on AI very rapidly. But everybody, of course, is using AI. Something as at Mobileye. So I think eventually the market will probably converge. My guess is that the progress we've seen between V12 or even V11 and V14 is probably a place where elements of sentience have been introduced in the model, where you can feel that the car is kind of thinking through situations and making decisions. Which I agree with you, is you never feel like that on a Waymo. So in a Waymo, you feel the machine is driving, and like on a Tesla, you feel like, sometimes I say, well, I feel like it's my dog driving. It's a pet driving. It's like, so you want to pet the car. So you well done. You did that unprotected turn well. But anyway. Now, coming back to the situation today, so all these things, the short answer is nobody has a clue. And Elon is always promising the thing for next week, and it takes always a bit longer. But we know the direction of travel, we know where it's going. I am relatively confident, the trend is getting us there, and it's and the gaps, even if it's a very difficult gap to close, because it's like a 5-9 kind of gap to close, you can see that it is closing. You understand like the drivers of closing the gap, which is more compute, more data. And given how well the gap, as it is getting smaller, continues to get closed, it's very difficult today, I think, to bet that FSD is never going to be unsupervised. And so I think we're going to get there, but no idea how long it takes and how fast the subsequent expansion of the robotaxi fleet is. Now, I think there are like basically 3 catalysts, 3 things that matter to before we get to a point where robotaxi really takes off. The first one is very simple. You need the fab. So you need the robotaxi manufacturing line to produce cybercabs. And as soon as you get like a manufacturing line up and running, you're talking thousands of cars a week. That would be like, I mean, how long does that take to Waymo today to roll out an additional 5,000 cars? You know, it's not taking them a week at all. Then the second catalyst, of course, is validating the actual robotaxi setup, which is taking the drivers, like the supervisors of the cars in Austin, and scaling that fleet without supervision, onboard supervision. And then the third catalyst is the one that is going to give you, if not a proof, a very strong indication of the universal characteristic of the technology, which is unsupervised FSD. So the day Tesla says, you can check your emails anywhere in the world where your car is driving, and if there is a problem, the car is going to call you back, and you'll have like 5 seconds to be back in charge. The day Tesla is running a fleet or two of cars without onboard supervision, and the day Tesla is producing cybercabs that cost them $20,000 or less, I think that's game on. And from then, it's just a matter of how fast you can push the machine.
Yeah. I know we're reaching time here, but I have a question I want to ask you, if that's okay. We have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
So I agree there, and I think one of the things I'm curious to hear your take on is so one of the biggest potential bottlenecks, which is a bottleneck today in a lot of different ways, is regulation. Which is so, for example, in the United States, there is a 2,500 unit cap for vehicles without a steering wheel and pedal. Not a huge deal for Tesla because they can't make cybercabs; they'll just make Model Ys. Okay, big deal. But over time, that becomes a problem because as the cybercab line scales, if you don't have a market to drop these vehicles in, unless you can sell it with a steering wheel and pedal, which I think they will, but we'll save that for a different day. You're not gonna be able to run your line at scale. And in other words, adhering to get it sort of raised to 90,000, but at full scale, when they're trying to make 2 million of units at least per year or more, that's still a very hard cap. And then we're not talking about Europe, we're not talking about China and other regions. So how do you see regulation? I guess let me reframe it. Do you think regulation is going to be a problem, or do you think the technology is such a no-brainer from a safety and cost perspective that the regulation will have no choice but to catch up because it's going to be political suicide to prevent this technology from actually propagating through their regions because of the benefits that it brings? So how do you view that within this context?
Look at the short but intense history of the ride-sharing market. Ride-sharing was basically illegal everywhere in the world. And one of the very, very effective attitude of the founder was to not to care and to go and to do ride sharing and be illegal for a while, and then you're like, okay, I'm illegal, but I'm employing like 10,000 people in your city, and all the people who vote for you love my service. So you can forbid it if you want, but that's not going to be good for you for a very long time. So I think I'm pretty sure that in the early days of ride sharing, you have a lot of VCs who passed on investing on Uber because they were like, hey guys, this is completely legal. Like, look at New York, the taxi medallion, it's $1 million taxi medallion. All this thing blew away in 18 months, almost everywhere in the world. And you have a few places, like even in Paris, the regulators could not resist that. So as long as you have avant-garde cities that adopt the service, the rest will come through. And by the way, when you ask a question to Elon, what he says is, regulation is what it is, and it might slow us down. And our pace depends on regulation. But the fact that regulation is going to let Robotaxi be very rapidly is to me obvious. Now, don't blame me if, like in 2027 or even this year, you have a fatality, someone is killed by a Robotaxi, and then you have this huge regulatory fender that gets supported by the public opinion because that's a horrific story of someone being dragged by a Robotaxi and dying.
Yeah.
like that. And when the space shuttle blew up, it pulled back a few years, space exploration. So these things will happen, but regulation, always think about it as a lagging factor, not a leading factor.
So what's interesting there with the Uber example is that the drivers and the people who took care, like actually use the service, were a huge forcing function to get a regulation change. But what's fascinating about the robotaxi angle is that you're actually displacing labor, even though the product might be significantly better and the service will be significantly better. So I'm wondering if that additional variable gives it sort of a unique thing, because we all follow the AI rhetoric in the media. You got the doomerism, you got the it's going to come and take my jobs, I'm really afraid. There's a lot of this dynamics, and Robotaxi is going to be one of the very first major waves of artificial intelligence in the physical world that's going to bring about it's going to bring about amazing safety and incredible cost per mile and super affordable and super safe and enjoyable and comfortable. But it's also going to displace jobs immediately. So do you view that as a risk to the regulatory environment, in addition to, like, let's say there's a death, like the actual displacement of labor through this? Because in New York, those taxi medallion folks can still just drive. They just drive for Uber instead of buying a taxi medallion. But with Robotaxi, they don't have a job in theory. So how do you view that?
Well, before Uber came in, I think a taxi medallion in New York was worth $1 million.
Yeah.
And you have people who have cars who can lock the city. When they realize their $1 million is going to zero, which is what happened, they are not going to let it happen. So the threat on paper on Uber was like a no-brainer, and you could have thought it's never going to happen simply because taxi drivers are not going to do that. In Paris, taxi drivers, every time they are unhappy, they lock the airports, and you have just to do what they want you to do. As a matter of fact, both in New York and Paris, Uber thrives, and taxi drivers saw the value of their medallion or their license in Paris plummets by 90%. And we went through that in 5 years. It was very, 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 very quick. So I think for the Robotaxi, the level of disruption is very similar to from taxi to ride-sharing network. So just by adjusting in real time supply and demand, you multiply by 3 the quality of the service. You can get a car very easily, and you divide by 3 the cost of the service, because the car is so well utilized that actually the cost per mile is much, much lower. And then the results, and you look at it in the US, over the first 5 years of ride sharing, personal transportation miles quadrupled, and the taxi miles came down from 100% market share to can't exactly remember, maybe 20% market share. So in absolute terms, it came down relatively not that much, but in market share, they basically disappeared. Like the economics of the Tesla version of Robotaxi versus the Uber driver, the gap is probably similar. So you should expect a similar dynamic. The only big difference, again, is that the Uber driver was able to replace the taxi driver in terms of capability 1-for-1 immediately, instantly, because it was human against human. The one thing we don't know in the Robotaxi game is how much, humans are going to stick around just because the Robotaxi is still not going to be able to address many use cases, and the number of use cases the Robotaxis can't address is going to shrink only very slowly over time. Yeah. So I guess my candid answer is we've no clue, and my guess would be that Robotaxis are going to ramp actually relatively slowly, for at least many years. And they're going to grow the market opportunity, which means that you're not going to see Uber driver being super upset and demonstrate. You have anecdotal situations, of course, but that's probably going to be only that. But now, maybe, you know, as a word of conclusion, now we know it's a down of Robotaxi. It's taking off, but we don't know much more than that in terms of how fast, how intense, how big. We'll have to see. So that's for the overall picture. And then the second thing we know is that Tesla is 7 times more capital efficient than competitors. They are already in a position to actually undercut market prices. So I think it's very challenging to compete meaningfully against Tesla in the next few years in that initial ramp.
Yeah.
Then in the long run, 15 years from now, there will probably be like a duopoly market structure of some sort.
Yeah, got it. Pierre, this was awesome. Thank you so much, man, for making the time. For everybody who wants to see this research for themselves, where can they go find this incredible piece of research, Pierre?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And they just have to go on my Twitter feed. And I did post a link to the research earlier this morning. You just follow the link, you drop your email address, and you get a free copy.
Love it. And make sure you follow Pierre as well. Don't forget to follow him. Great follow.
Yeah. And follow Farzad and follow
yes, unfollow me, follow him.
We're competing for followers, so that's
Oh, that's news to me. It's on, brother. Let's go. Thank you, Pierre. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Farzad.
Thank you.
That was great.
It was awesome.